for sure. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it. Also, big shout out and thank you to our guests today. We've got Steve Chiang, who's the president and founder, one of the founders of Fortis Games. Steve, first off, thanks so much for joining us. I after my conversation with Sean, I wasn't 100% sure that we were going to ever be able to do that again, but here we are. So it's great. It's great. Thanks. How you doing this morning?
Exciting.
Yeah.
Doing well.
Excellent. So I just want to kind of jump into it. First and foremost, like it just needs to be said. You're from Iowa originally. Yeah.
Yep.
And of course I'm a Nebraska kid. So in a Midwest battle, Steve, which is cooler, Nebraska or Iowa?
Yeah. I mean, this is a tricky question. I mean, I grew up with Nebraska football, right? I was able to see Scott Frost win the Orange Bowl in 1998 in the Orange Bowl and take down Tennessee, but not looking so good these days in football.
No, they're trash. They're absolute garbage. In fact, I've never been happier to not be a Cornhusker fan ever, really. I just when you live in Nebraska, it's sort of like you're forced to be a fan in a way. You just understand who Tom Osborne is, Scott Frost, and all this stuff. But yeah, it hasn't been pretty.
It's been rough.
Yeah,
so I think Iowa right now is holding up their end of the bargain in sports.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that is.
But the Big Ten still
underperforms
every bowl season.
Yeah, that is true. So, Steve, I talked a little bit about my recently started working at Fortis, how much I'm enjoying it. I'm really excited to kind of dive into not only your personal career and journey, because I think it's really incredible, especially when you look at it across the entire gaming space. And we were having a conversation earlier about how it's really interesting how little behind the scenes and sort of content there is out there, where you get to learn about a lot of the people that are working on games and even some of the history around that. So for that reason, myself and I think everyone here watching is pretty excited. But before we kind of really dive in, why don't I just ask you to give a general introduction? I mean, I've mentioned your name, I've mentioned who you are. Don't quite want to jump into your journey so much, but just so that people can hear, who you are, how long you've been in the industry, et cetera.
Oh, that's interesting. So I have probably been in the industry. Well, I guess this year I'll be in the industry for 30 years. So it's 3 big decades. And I grew up, I was lucky to have, I was in Iowa City, and I was lucky enough for my dad worked at the University of Iowa, and he bought a Apple II with 16K of RAM, and we loaded games off a cassette player, and I played Brickout, Invaders, and Lemonade. Those were my 3 early games. So lifelong gamer, been really, really lucky to be in this business. I tell people, and we'll talk about it probably in a little bit, that I've worked a lot of hours, but never really felt like I've worked a day in my life.
Yeah, that's it's something common that we hear a lot when you truly love and are passionate about what you do. So I want to hop into journey in just a moment, but before we dive into the your video game career, let's establish what video games you love. You gave us a kind of a sneak peek at some of the first games that you ever played, but obviously I get the impression that you were a big gamer when you were younger. When did the bug bite you? What are some of your favorite games, whether of past or what you might currently be playing?
I mean, I played everything on Apple II, so everything from Lode Runner to Karateka to sort of Prince of Persia, all the kind of classics. But I think the Super Nintendo was really kind of one of my favorite eras, playing Exile, Metroid, all that stuff, Punch Out. That stuff, the Nintendo stuff has always captured me. Probably my favorite game of all time is probably somewhere between Warcraft, the Zelda series, and Metroid.
Awesome. When you were playing some of these games when you were younger, did you ever think that video games would potentially be your career? I always find it interesting because everyone kind of has their own kind of like thought I want to be an astronaut when I grow up. And I think now it's pretty common to hear like, I want to go into game design. I want to be a games artist. I want to program. But did you have any kind of desire that early?
No real clue. I think for me, it was just mostly about computers, getting into programming to make video games, and then getting into the game business. But I do remember a very distinct day in high school. I was on my computer, and my dad was like, "This computer thing's not going anywhere," and so you should do something else. And I was like, "Wow, okay." But there's just something addicting about being able to create stuff and build stuff with a computer.
So were your is it fair to say that your parents weren't necessarily against video games? I mean, I had the kind of parents who are like, yeah, we're not opposed to it, but we just think that it's kind of like, throwaway entertainment in a lot of ways. And I grew up in a sports family, so I was kind of the odd one out because I would rather plant my butt in front of the TV and play 100 games of Street Fighter than like go out and throw some lawn darts or something. But where did your parents sit with that?
I think traditionally, like Asian families, not to be too stereotypical, want your kids to be a doctor, an engineer, a dentist, and kind of more,
Sure.
somewhat traditional. So it was definitely, but my parents are actually pretty progressive. Growing up in Iowa City, I guess it's kind of conservative, but Iowa City itself is not. And they were very open to me exploring, but I got some interesting career advice along the way that I didn't follow.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So, well, you know, I think when you were kind of attending college and stuff, it wasn't like there was like, hey, join our game design program, right? I mean, I remember back when I was flipping through game mags, it was like DigiPen was the first time I ever saw, oh, they're building a school for video. Like that makes so much sense. I aspire to go there, right? Now we're seeing tracks that kind of help you go in that route or start your journey. You went from electrical engineering to video games. Is that correct?
Yeah, I went to Columbia and studying engineering, but mostly because I was doing the computer stuff on the side.
Okay.
So I wanted to learn the hardware side. I'm fascinated by the hardware, always still am.
And but you kind of were self-taught programmer then?
Yeah, my friend in middle school, we met over minor 2049 on the Apple II and pre-algebra, and he sat behind me and he told me he had a copy of minor 2049er, and I was like, okay, I need to meet you and we need to talk games. But his name's Jason Anderson. We co-founded Tiburon together, and he taught me to program. So we in high school, towards the end of high school, we created a paint program. I created a shareware double Tetris game before kind of getting into it for in real life.
So you mentioned shareware, which is like an era that is really close to my heart, right? Like the number of
Love it.
games and franchises that I discovered through BBSs and through shareware. Did you go through similar era where like hopping around on the BBSs and getting mad when people picked
Oh
up the
yeah.
phone and stuff?
I remember the 9600 baud modem for $1,000, or it might have been $2,000. I mean, it's crazy, and we had to save up for that one for a long time. But yeah, the BBSs were the escape from Iowa City. So I mean, I'm in a town of 20,000 people, and nobody really does what you do or what you like. And so I met people in Chicago and other cities, and they taught me how to get on BBSs, and we did a lot of that for a long time.
I love that. Again, that's like an era that I am very fond of. So, um, electrical engineering kind of start to make this shift into video games. Let's talk about that, right? Let's start with your journey through the games industry. One of the first kind of stops for you was Visual Concepts. I think you were the kind of head programmer, or maybe the only coder programmer on a game called Weapon Lord. But tell me a little bit about this time.
I mean, for us, like you, I mean, we played in college. We lined up at the Street Fighter 2 machine, and you put up your quarters and you played Street Fighter. So, getting out of college, moved to Marin and took a job at Visual Concepts, and one of the games was a fighting game. It actually started out as a four-player fighting game, and the senior producer was Ken Lobb from Killer Instinct fame, and he wanted to make this game called Melee, and it was a 4-player fighting game. But he ended up leaving. I forget if he went to Nintendo or if he went to Microsoft. But a new guy came in, James Goddard, and he wanted to create this badass fighting game with weapons. And so that's kind of what we set out to do. And it was myself, I had another person helping me on some screens, and about 10 artists. So it was quite a time. It was it looks so old now. But, this thing had weapon breaks. We had weapon breaks. We had fatalities. You could gut people. You could explode heads. You could juggle their heads after you cut it off. I mean, it was on the edge of gore at the time.
Talk to me about right, programming something like this. I mean, when you see the credits scroll at the end, it's not a massive team by any means, right? Compared to the teams. I mean, shoot, I think I finished Atomic Heart this past weekend, and I think the credits were like 14 minutes long. And I always take the time to at least let the credits roll, right? Like, I appreciate all the people that work on these games and bring it to, but I was like, holy moly. So tell me what it's like to work on it, you know, just like a game like that, where it's just kind of all on you. Is that accurate?
Close. We, Jason was a visual concept, my friend, and he had helped. He created Clay Fighter, so he had a little
Okay.
bit of tools to make these fighting games, and but we had to take it. I had to take it farther, and I was a tools programmer. I was the programmer. I was trying to turn these ideas into gameplay and fun. So it was kind of yeah, you're definitely a jack of all trades. It's a lot of hours, and it's but it was fun. I mean, it was a really sort of your first game. You can't forget those types of things.
Right. Yeah, I would imagine it's kind of a journey. And the SNS period was amazing period, right? We're getting all sorts of new games. We saw new innovations, new things being done. It was really exciting and fantastic. So before we move on to your next step, I've got to quiz you because it seems only appropriate. Do you remember the name of the final boss from Weapon Lord?
Zerat with a
Well, I'm
Z.
going to see. That is correct. It was Zarak. Yes, yes, a big, beefy monster guy with a giant sword. And all right, you
And a
passed.
spider on his head.
You passed. All right. So then a really interesting right moment, and probably the place that is truly the spark where your career kind of starts on an upward trajectory, and that was with people that you'd worked with before, founding Tiburon and I think to many, especially if you're an older school gamer, you're like, oh wow, okay, I remember. So talk to me a little bit about that and how that kind of led to EA.
And we were all in Marin, and we're sitting here looking. We're making $35,000 a year, and we're starting to looking at these houses and saying, "Man, housing's really expensive. It's 100K for a condo." And so we're like, we had this idea. John, the other co-founder, John Shappert, grew up in Miami, but after Hurricane Andrew had relocated to Orlando, and so he would go back to Orlando for every holiday, and we were kind of like, well, if we go to Orlando, it's 10%, 15%, 10, 12, 13% less state income tax. Housing's much cheaper. And we're just a little bit out of the rat race. And, Florida's still really nice. It's sunny year round, beaches, and we're 20, 23, 24, 25. I forget what, 25. And, we didn't really care. So we picked up, we moved to Orlando and started Tiburon. Our specialty was coming from the Apple II was the Super Nintendo processor. It has the same processor as the Apple II GS, and we kind of got into our first three games were Madden 95, Madden 96, and 97, because even later. It was a Madden football at NHL and a Mech Warrior game from Activision. So that was what we started, and then we rolled that into the PlayStation was coming out, and the original PlayStation, and our old company was making Madden football, and so they gave us College Football USA. It was called at the time College Football USA 97 was the game we were working on, and Madden 96 didn't go well. In an earnings call, EA announced that they were killing both Madden 96 and NHL 96 on the PlayStation, and they were taking the earnings hit. And then we literally got a call 2 days later saying, "Hey, we want to turn your college football game into Madden NFL 97 on PlayStation and Saturn." And we're like, "Okay, that's amazing, right? I mean, that's huge. Oh, and we want you to make a Super Nintendo version, a Sega Genesis version, and we want you to ship it in September." And this is like February 3rd or
Oh
something.
my
It's like February
gosh.
4th. And, we kind of had something running, but we didn't have really much running. And it was basically myself, Jason, two other engineers, and 10 artists. And that was a long year. I think we easily logged 100 hours a week for many, many weeks in there.
I mean that seems wild because I'm sure back then there wasn't as much tooling. I mean, I would imagine each individual port was kind of its own, right? Its own build. There wasn't a sort of just run it and it'll spit out right the other versions that we need, or you kind of had to approach that a lot differently than you would now.
Yeah, for sure. Especially the 16-bit to the 32-bit. Saturn and PlayStation were same code base, but Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis were all different. But we were small. I mean, we were 20 people. Like, I
Wow.
mean, and they gave us like five SKUs on that day, and we're like, okay, well,
When
I guess we'll figure this out.
when you look at kind of where the Madden franchise is at today, is it kind of mind blowing to be like, wow, we played a part in this franchise kind of taken off, right? Because the Super Nintendo and even the PlayStation era of sports games, I think were incredibly important for the popularity. I mean, I mentioned earlier I'm not really a sports games, but they became a staple of like the college dorms and the college houses where it's like even I was telling a buddy, it's like I knew every hockey player's name despite never watching it because of NHL I think 97 that was on the PlayStation, right? So what do you think about when you see where a franchise is at today and you were kind of there at the beginning to help push it into like the next era of popularity?
I mean, it's incredible to be a part of it. I mean, I think just generally the games business, like I never got into games to get to billions of players, right? And now we've gone from millions of players to billions of
Right.
players a year. I mean, just the growth and the exponential growth of gaming. This is not like, hey, I looked at surveyed 15 businesses and I'm going to get into video games because it's going to grow. It's just sort of a, hey, I like video games, and this kind of just organically happened. But the cultural impact of EA Sports and being a part of that, and we did a lot of brand stuff with EA Sports. It was always, at its peak, it was really edgy and funny, and the tagline for many many years was, "If it's in the game, it's in the game," and we just tried to like take stuff in real life and put it in. But now it's kind of like that story's kind of done, right? It's the new
Sure.
era. Just better fidelity visuals, better celebrations, better audio, and all that kind of stuff. But where things are now, it's got it's definitely it's got to find its own way.
Yeah, yeah. So, success with Tiburon, then acquired by Electronic Arts. Talk to me a little bit about that, and then where that took you next.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, as soon as they gave us the keys to Madden, EA basically said they're going to hire us, or they're going to buy us. Sorry, and so I think we got acquired in 1998, and then I spent another 12 years with EA. Ultimately, we grew Tiburon to about 600 people. The team is still making Madden football. We did Tiger Woods golf when I was there. We did NCAA football and NASCAR games. And then somewhere along the line, I took over kind of sports game development across EA Sports. And that included the Vancouver studio, which was making FIFA,
Mm.
NHL, and NBA at the time. So kind of running the sports game business, but really sort of focusing on this idea of, hey, can we take all these games and turn this into a broader business? So that we did some cool stuff like in I think it was a 2004 Madden 2004 with Michael Vick. We did the EA Sports resume. So this idea that if I won the NCAA football national championship, the Super Bowl, I won the NHL, the Stanley Cup, it would all show up in your profile. And
Mm,
we did it with this like memory card and have the patent on cross game file sharing. So it was kind of some of those cool things that we could do, having multiple games and shipping every year.
sure.
Probably the biggest one we did was we did a strategy session, and coming out of it, free to play was coming up, and microtransactions, and the FIFA team came back with the idea of FIFA Ultimate Team, and we're like, yes, this is perfect, and that was sort of the origin of FIFA Ultimate Team, which is now a pretty big business in itself.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned kind of like free to play, and that kind of plays into the next step in your journey. Went from EA to Zynga. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was in Orlando flying to San Francisco for EA and Vancouver. So these long cross country flights, no Wi-Fi, and I'm playing like flight control, on an iTouch,
I was
and
just
I'm like,
mentioning
this
that
is
game earlier today, so that's awesome.
it's an amazing game, and you're just like, wow, this is incredible. But for you could sell 60 million copies, and no company gives a crap, right? I mean,
Right.
it's $60 million business. It's not a real business, and it's not repeatable. Like how many things can you count on that are going to sell 60 million copies? So it was clear to me the business was moving free to play. At the time, EA had a game called FIFA Online. It was
Right.
made by Nexon and NeoWiz, and it was in Korea, and it was kind of doing $100 million a year. I don't speak Mandarin, so I was, kind of English my native language, and for me to learn free to play, I wasn't going to be able to go to Asia. So I met Mark Pincus in 2009. He told me he had $300 million games on Facebook, and I was like, "Wow, that's crazy. That's amazing." And that's kind of, I didn't want to be the record music label executive with the corner office going to the Grammys, and the business model's burning, but I've got this great office, and I'm just like, hey, yeah, life's good.
Right.
So I made the jump to Zynga, moved to San Francisco, been here in San Francisco since, and really, an amazing time. I mean, the Facebook growing. I mean, I think when Zynga started on Facebook, it was about 24, 25 million MAU. And what is it now? A couple billion.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, just the growth, the meteoric growth of Facebook and being on platform. And just, this idea, like we had 35 million players a day in Farmville. It was crazy. It was like this insane, like just hard to fathom how broad gaming had become.
I think people look back on that and they might either say, well, I wasn't on Facebook at the time, or they might say, oh yeah, I remember this fondly. Or they might also say like, I remember it and my friends used to spam me all the time, right? To try to get me to whatever. But from a like development perspective and point of view, it was pretty fascinating that, right, this sort of social platform, which was new in and of itself, could potentially serve as a game platform, right? And I think I'm guessing throughout your career, right, there's always been the question of how do we connect people better, right? The Super Nintendo had a weird modem. I think the Sega Genesis had like a weird modem, but none of those things really ever took off or gained traction. So we're kind of coming to this era where, connectivity was kind of on a whole nother level. Was that one of the super exciting driving aspects of like what Zynga was doing and what was possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from our BBS days, the connectivity was important. We introduced online play on the PlayStation 2, where you had to buy a modem, and we created the EA Sports Online backend for all the connectivity for those games. So it's definitely been something that's been chasing. Yeah, I mean, I think with Zynga, there was really this idea. I mean, the games of Madden football they were becoming an hour, right? You sit down, and one of the last things we did was we kind of shrank the amount of time it took
Right.
to play a game of Madden. But this idea, and Mark was talked about, is like we're busy 15 minutes a day, connect with your friends, and it was also session based, right? That was kind of what the other piece. I don't think I recognized that all at the time, but that was something really interesting as, I've got kids and you're sort of, you have less and less time to play games, but you still want to play, right? You still want
Right.
to have that experience. So for me, Zynga was really about analytics. So this product management culture was
Mm.
Zynga formed as a web company and had product managers that were sort of into the A/B testing. And instead of like saying, "Hey, my gut says we should do this," it was, "Let's just go test this with consumers, put it on an A/B test, see what consumers prefer, and then pick that, and then turn that experiment to 100%." So there's just different way of thinking.
Right.
Zynga also had this digital delivery mechanism, right? I mean, there was no game client. Like we weren't selling discs; it was all digital and serving the scale. I mean, at EA, I mean, there's so many great things about EA, but at the time, the website got updated on launch day. So literally, you spend all this money putting people to Tuesday when you launch the game, and and if you go there early, the website's under maintenance, and you're just like, you just can't do this, right? Let alone deliver, millions and millions of players a day in the game.
Yeah.
And then I think the last thing was really this idea. I mean, you know, these games look so simple on the surface, but it was all driven by the back end and the tuning, the data, the analytics, all that stuff. Zynga at the time was one of the biggest customers of Amazon Web Services, just really early in terms of sort of the new way of delivering these games. You'd have a client, you'd have a server. These things had to be in sync to avoid cheating and all that. So if you ever
Right.
got a desync in a social game on Facebook, it was because the client and the server got out of sync and you have to reload. But there was just so much fascinating new stuff that was happening, plus the new business model, obviously, just moving to free to play, and understanding sort of how those loops work. Just fascinating time.
Yeah, I mean, it really is fascinating too because I think right, sometimes we don't always appreciate, right, like the engine under the hood, right? We're just thankful that our car gets us to point A to point B. And you make a point that I find really fascinating, which is like this being a time that was a lot about analytics and data, because prior to that, you weren't able to, right, like this was not necessarily something within the games industry that was easy to tap into, right? If you wanted to sit down and get players' opinions before a game was out, you had to do so. You had to bring them in, you had to do the play testing, you had to do sort of this aspect. Whereas suddenly there is the ability to make a slight tweak here, A/B tested on both sides, and be able to then make a really informed decision on, yes, this is the way we should go about that. That ushers in such a unique shift of thinking overall in the industry. And one thing you mentioned was you weren't quite aware of this while it was happening, but I was wondering if you would kind of dive into that aspect a little bit, because this is sort of the cusp of, right, a new way of thinking about making games, approaching games, etc. Talk to us a little bit about that. Like, I'm kind of curious, Steve, like when did it actually then click and went like, oh my gosh, this is going to change everything?
I mean, I feel like we're still learning on that front, but I
Yeah,
think when
true.
in talking to people from Zynga, and especially some of the brilliant product managers who I still keep in touch with, a lot of them. It was just a new way of thinking about games, and it was just like, I mean, literally, we're reduced as gamers to clicks and taps and what actions we're confirming. I used to joke. I mean, I used to say Mark Pincus has reduced gaming into a math formula, because so much of what Zynga was doing on Facebook was the requests and the feed
Right.
drops, and over time, Facebook really clamped down on that to make a better user experience. I mean, usually when you talk about Zynga, people are like, "Oh, Farmville." I had my Facebook feed was filled with
Yeah.
Farmville posts,
Right.
and it's the good and the bad. But the one of the biggest innovations at Zynga was the lonely cow, and it was the sad cow that needed friends, and pulls at the heartstrings, and that was one that the fiction got more people to click on it and engage. And it's really when you start to realize that, yeah, it's the little things. It's the color of the button. It is the placement. It is, it could be any number of things that increases conversion. And in free to play, really the whole map is, if I start with 5 million users, how do I get to people who are going to play every day for years, and then some fraction of that group will monetize. And
Yeah.
it's the whole business model, and it's just really interesting. But it's just conversion, kind of at the basic. I mean, Amazon does this every day when you go to Amazon and you convert.
Um, I have a million questions, but I'm already feeling like we're diving in and I'm not doing the greatest job of like watching our time. So talk to me. We went from Zynga. I'm going to kind of go back to Zynga because I think there's some really interesting things I'd love to kind of chat about, but talk to me. You went from Zynga to WB and spent a fair amount of time at WB. What did you do there? And was there any reason for the shift?
Yeah, for me, there I actually took about a year and a half off. I was very lucky to take some time off. I was able to advise, do some board seats. I really thought about whether I wanted to stay in video games, and kind of at the end of it, I was just like, I just love the people, the processes, the work, and so kind of said, I'm gonna get back into video games, and went to Warner Brothers. I thought I would start a company at that time, but at the time, the business was really tough. It was very much a Flappy Birds had come out. It's one person in Vietnam, and you're sort of competing with the world. And as much maybe previous history and experience, it didn't necessarily translate into the modern gaming ecosystem at the
It's
time.
interesting. Yeah.
So for me, Warner Brothers had IP. I mean, the Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, DC Universe, Lord of the Rings. They have very little on mobile, and it just became this nice opportunity to really build a mobile business. And so when I went to Warner Brothers, I was heading up console, the game studios, and great game studios in terms of NetherRealm making Mortal Kombat and Injustice, the Shadow of Mordor series from Monolith, Rocksteady with the Batman Arkham series. So Warner Brothers was kind of this sleeper company. And what was really interesting to me about Warner Brothers was just the approach. And from Kevin Sujihara to David, they really believed in creators. And so on the movies, you invest in a director, and you invest hundreds of millions of dollars with a director, but it's the director's vision, and you try not to screw with them. You let them do their thing,
Right.
and treat it the same way on TV. And that was the same approach on video games. And there was this insane amount of commitment and investment to building these games, which, coming from an Activision or EA, I mean, your game kind of starts to go south, it's killed, and people are laid off. And so it was kind of a very refreshing difference. And here's a company who really understands a content business, right? It's, we're going to make some great stuff, and it might still fail. And that's kind of, we have to live with that. And, so that was really the thing that was intriguing to me. I mean, we did a couple of things at Warner Brothers I'm pretty proud of. One was we built Game of Thrones Conquest. So came in and took a studio that had been working on this game for a while, and was able to turn it around and make the changes needed to ship a game that has done around $700 million. This was maybe a couple of years ago. And then more recently, and it just finally came out, was Hogwarts Legacy. And this started as Disney was getting, they do the thing where they get into the game business and out of the game business.
Mm-hmm.
And they were shutting down all their games, including Infinity. And one of the studios that started around when Tiburon started was called Avalanche in Salt Lake City. And so we met the team through the sale process, but then nobody ended up buying. So Disney in May of 2016 announced they're getting out of the games business and laid everybody off in the studio. We had been in contact. So about 2 days later, we reached out and said, hey, we want to make 125 offers to this team. We didn't really know what we were going to do with them at the time, but we knew we needed, studios, and it's very hard to find studios that have worked together, shipped together,
right,
through the trenches. And there's a shorthand, there's a speed, there's just so many good things that come from teams that have kind of built a couple games together and shipped together. And so we wanted to try to preserve it. John Blackburn, who was the founder and the studio head out there, worked with us really hard. We kind of secured the people. And then we're trying to figure out what to do. At the time, we're thinking, well, maybe some of this narrative story stuff. And I think there was a Harry Potter brand study happening, and I'm like, we should go with Harry Potter. Like, this is this is a no-brainer, but it was still a pain in the butt.
Right.
But it made sense. Like, hey, here's a studio. Let's go make something that fans want. And at the time, there's a lot of talk about how Harry Potter was the Star Wars of Warner Brothers, and they wanted to get back into gaming after a long hiatus. And
Yeah.
there are many things to work out with the author, and but we were able to get through a lot of that. But so it still took 7 years. I mean, it was painful, a lot of ups and downs on that project. But I'm so proud of the team for persevering, getting to an 85 Metacritic. I heard 12 million copies, 800 plus $1 million, initially. So pretty excited for that team. And it's probably one of those things that only Warner Brothers could do. It's just this weird sort of faith in, games, because
Yeah.
that game had so many twists and turns and ups and downs. And there are days you'd say, there's no way they're getting there.
Yeah.
But you know,
That's super
that's
interesting.
why we make games.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, was there more pressure to work at a studio that had right these beloved IPs, that where it was not only you needed to achieve studio satisfactory in terms of them saying, good job, Steve, you made a game, it made money, but you also have to achieve a fan satisfaction level, right? If I'm a diehard fan of Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones and you mess the IP, is there pressure from both sides in a scenario like that?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's pressure on every game. I mean,
Sure.
it's like you can't. It's very very hard to win. I think but there is added pressure with the fandoms. But the nice thing too, though, because of their IP and their own, there's also a long-term view, right? So like so many times in the game business, we'll license an IP, right? And it's a license, and you kind of have 4 years to maximize it. And you know, you put out as much content, as much good content as you can, but at the end of the day, you have a limited amount of time. When you're the owner of the IP, it's like, look, I don't care, make a great game, because that's what's more important than, we're not in this for one hit and,
Right.
making $100 million. We're in this to, really build this IP over time, engage fans, engage the next generation of fans. In some ways, games were strategic for these IPs because it was the entryway for new people, new players to get in and get acquainted. I mean,
Sure.
you think about comic books, we all love comic books, but how many kids are buying comics books up these days?
Yeah, yeah, that's super interesting. And that kind of brings us to present day, right? You have this like you have this like long career, you're kicking off franchises here, you're kind of like working in an innovative space that's looking at like social platforms and analytics and a different form of monetization that's hitting the scene. Worked with major IPs at WB and kind of got a lot of projects going there that we're still seeing kind of come out. And then kind of Fortis comes around, right? And you mentioned at one point earlier that you had thought about making your own company before joining WB, but then you left WB, and that's what you did. So tell me about kind of Fortis, right? How that came to be. We got to hear Sean's version of it, but I want to hear the Steve version of it.
I think they're probably very similar. I think for me, it's so much of my career has been about the people, and every once in a while you just meet people that you really believe in, you really click with, you really believe you can do something great with, and it was that way when we started Tiburon. John Shepard, Jason, and I, we were all coders. We were all friends before we started the business, and we probably were pretty lucky in that we really never had that big disagreement because we were so aligned. At the end of the day, we really trusted each other. It was a huge piece of when you make games, making games is hard. I think most people know that this is a hard business, and you really have to do it with people you believe in, trust, and you want to go to war with in some ways, right? I mean, war is probably the wrong analogy, but so I met Sean actually when I was between Zynga and Warner Brothers, and I was just advising companies, and you see Sean, he had a full head of hair, and it was glorious. But he tells a story where after working with me for a few years, it didn't work out that well for him. But yeah, anytime you see hair like that, you got to say like, oh, you're interesting. I like you. But we really hit it off on the game side. We talked a lot of games. We had very similar views. We came at it from different approaches, but we were also sort of very felt like we were very complementary. And so at Warner Brothers, it bought his company, brought him into the fold. We were trying to make some big changes at Warner Brothers. Some we did, some we didn't. But really trying to teach Warner Brothers free to play and services and this aspect of live. And Sean brought in Calvin, whom I had known socially, but Calvin Lau, and when AT&T bought Warner Brothers, there was a little bit of I mean, I tell people when I grew up in Iowa, you see those Monster.com ads, and it's like I want to work for the phone company, right? Not really my thing. So
Right.
there was sort of a love hate for games, and anytime there's a company where there's a love hate for games, it's just there's only one thing for games, it's love, and so it was pretty easy to say, hey, this wasn't going to work, and we kind of looked at it and decided, hey, we think we can do this better. We have an edge on live game operations, which is still a relatively early innings of live game. We have a viewpoint on the types of people we need, the types of culture we need to build. And I think, we have this ambition of creating a top game company, but really kind of doing it the right way. EA from its founding was really a sales and marketing organization,
Hmm.
and that DNA is coded in there. Zynga a little bit more of a web, a little bit more of a ROI company, and games take a long time to make, and sometimes the ROI doesn't pencil, but you got to commit and believe. And Warner Brothers is actually more of a film and entertainment company. So this idea of a games company in the free to play space, pure play with hopefully leaders who people look at and say, oh yeah, they understand how to make games, and we're going to make games smart. I don't know if you can actually make games smartly, but you try every
Right.
day to
Right.
figure out how to get better and better. And that was kind of what kicked it off. This idea that we can design games and get to millions of players, and hopefully do it in a meaningful, smart way that really creates a place that people want to be for decades and engage with.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I think we hear a lot in not only games industry but in a lot of industries. We want to do things different. We're gonna take a different approach. But when I do look at the games industry, there's been a ton of innovation, right? We can clearly even see some of those points of innovation and growth across the entirety of your career. But there's also, right, the ability for you to look back and see the road that has been paved and the journey that you've taken. And I would imagine that with the games industry, despite all of this innovation, despite these sort of new experiments that some have failed and some have succeeded, but you pick up on a lot of things that you would just like to do differently, or you wished worked differently in the industry. So kind of maybe a two-part question. What would you say some of the most valuable lessons that you learned over your 30 years experience that you carry into Fortis, or like what were some of the important things that you said, I just don't know if I agree with how this is done in the industry, and I would like to tackle that a little bit differently?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's so many things, but for me, I think what I keep coming back to is when whether it's a single engineer making a Super Nintendo game, or the 80 people we had on the team, or the 200 people we had on the team, it always comes back to great games ultimately are created by great teams and talent, and how you manage that is really important, and how you give people sort of agency and clarity, and how you build these games. But for me, it's always been the investment in the teams, and the people. It just the thing that drove me crazy at all these companies was these layoffs, and you do these layoffs to appease the street, and it was just
Right.
this the craziest thing in the world. And, like a lot of people who are getting laid off never did anything deserve to get laid off, but, it's a
But work
numbers
hard in
game.
a
It's a
lot of
widget.
cases. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Look, I've had to do layoffs, I've had to restructure, but it's painful, I had to shut down the studios. I generally, it's probably one of the hardest things to do in the space is to take a team that for probably no reason of, well, there's always some reasons, there's always some shared accountability in these things, but for the most part, it wasn't their fault. So that to me, the investment in teams and how do we build a better place for people to work, feel empowered, and feel like they can do their best work. That's kind of one piece. I think when I was being in EA and Zynga, and I kind of talked about it, so much of the business is run by the street, and it's about Wall Street, and it's about the expectations of the game company, and you know, and for a mobile company and for a hit-driven company, it's just so hard to be predictable, and once even if so that tension of we got to put something out or we got to announce something because otherwise our stock price can take a hit is probably one of the hardest dynamics. And so for me, like
Interesting.
after Zynga and doing the IPO, having doing well for a little while, and then having it all kind of fall apart pretty quickly. For me, it was like I really didn't want to go back to a public games company. So for Warner Brothers, the games was so small in the empire of Time Warner Media.
Right. Yeah.
It didn't really matter. It was a rounding error, and so that worked okay because you sort of have the
It's
space to be able to
wild, by the
create.
way, to say that they're a rounding
Yeah.
error, but yeah, yeah.
um, but yeah, but you need these games take time, and one of the things that was I do admire about Warner Brothers was there was a lot of focus on quality, and the continued focus on quality, and in more time if you needed more, you needed to do more because like Hogwarts was supposed to. I think Hogwarts was supposed to ship in 2019. Frankly, I mean, I don't know, maybe 2020. I forget, but so just that added time, and obviously that costs hundreds of millions of dollars more to give a game more time, and you know, but um, but games are hard. It takes time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting because, of course, when we had Sean on, right, he talked a little bit about the design lane and the idea about giving yourself the time to really find those threads of innovation and think about the problems that you want to solve in the industry and in games as a whole, or what players really want. So, you mentioned quality too. And I feel like both of those things have at some point in your career kind of been, in conflict. So, how do you balance like speed versus quality when creating games? And even as an aside, like in a global remote environment, which is what Fortis is, which I love and I think is great and has been, there's challenging, which, I don't think anyone would say otherwise, but, what is that still yet to be determined, how you have that perfect balance of like speed versus quality when you're creating games?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just diving into quality. I like refer to quality with a K from being from the Midwest, but there's so much of there's so many biases in quality, right? If you come from AAA, quality is about visuals, fidelity, and all that type of stuff. If you come from free to play, it's about systems, and I mean, if you sort of really get back into what drives the best games,
Mm,
it's really the systems and the system design. But you look at things like Minecraft and Roblox, and you never say like, oh, those are I don't know. You wouldn't look at those if you came from the console era and said these games look great, right? And so there's this interesting thing about and as we started Fortis, it was really this idea of creating a repeatable um, an innovation company, but a company that is capable of repeatedly generating great shots on goal that could be commercially viable. It was just this really interesting problem and challenge, and when you sort of back that up, it really comes down to the culture and the talent and how we assemble people. But we
right.
have to make if you sort of read Creativity Inc., you sort of have to make failing the area around success, and it has to be okay. But the moment we kill something, if the whole team rage quits, and we're starting over, that's a problem. And
Right,
but
right.
when you're trying to find new experiences and new things and fun, it comes back to, yeah, you got to try stuff, and a bunch of stuff's not going to work. Most of the stuff's not going to work, and so building that sort of foundationally from the ground up was really one of the key points of Fortis.
So, I've heard you say a few times, right? Teams are really important. Creating those teams has been really important. We've seen that demonstrated throughout your career. So, can you give us some insight? Just go a little bit further into what what that means and what you would define as a great team. Um, yeah, I just love. I'll just leave that at that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's top to bottom. It really starts with the leaders, the vision, how the leadership wants to treat people. Um, I think there's at Zynga, we talked about ego to talent ratio. You're looking for low ego, high talent. When I reflect on sort of my career, it's really been, I think, my self-awareness and my ability to say, look, yeah, that was kind of stupid. Like, why did you do that? And say, you've got to do better next time. And the kind of idea of wanting to learn. So, I mean, we're definitely, you got to be really, really good at what you do. But, what we found was we had engineers who were really, really smart, but they couldn't come in a working day. They couldn't collaborate. And so they're sort of on an island. And as long as you have work for that really brilliant engineer who can't work with other people, it's fine. But as soon as you need to get into a team environment, collaborate, figure out the trade-offs, what's going to make work best for this in the time frame that you have, and the audience that you're looking for. Those are the types of people that are really you're really looking for. They're really really good at what they do, but they're also very collaborative and can take feedback. And it's like in all these games. I mean, the cool thing about analytics is you realize you put stuff out there and you don't know what's going to take off. And having that data, I think in H1Z1, when Sean and I were consulting, it was like the pink boar's head was sort of the most popular cosmetic. And, you don't know that. I mean, who knows what's going to be popular, but having that analytics helps you understand it. But, you can get in those arguments every day. It's not about my aesthetic or what I want. It's really about what players are looking for. We have to believe that we have a sense of what players are looking for, but we don't know at the end of the day what's going to be the most popular piece of content or any of that. And we have to be open to that information and data to respond sort of effectively to players.
Yeah, it might be a good segue into maybe a question that comes from a place of bias because, right, like I think of things we talked about from the Fortis perspective, right? The design lane and giving teams the room to explore and really think about right innovation in space. We've got a big difference in sort of the global remote approach that Fortis has taken, and as you said, like a place where you are encouraged to right think outside of the box and really kind of push yourself in terms of ideas and what you can bring to the table. The selfish part is that when I begin talking to Fortis, um, right, like the Fortis vision of community and how important the players was so clear to me that I actually thought it was bullshit. Right, like it's like I've heard this before, I've been spoon fed this before. I need a little bit more to believe that, but since being convinced by Sean, you, many other leaders, what you've demonstrated through my every step of the way is how committed you are to that aspect. So I'm curious if you would give me and the audience some insight in terms of like how you think about the role of community at Fortis, how it informs like what Fortis is trying to accomplish, and also if there's any point in your journey in which right you kind of realize like the community and the players they need a commitment from the leadership of these companies. Will you kind of explore that a little bit with me?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we were making Madden football back in the BB, in the message board days, we had Madden Mania, and there was another one, Men Mania is the one I remember, but there are these hardcore fan sites, and they're talking about the tuning of the game, and it's really, really, they're into the game, and they're your biggest fans, and within EA and the marketing PR organization, they wouldn't do anything for them. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't we? And they're like, well, they're small. Like, there's no reach in this in sort of traditional PR, but they're your most loyal fans. And look, I mean, communities are hard, right? I mean, you get positive and you get the negative, and you also get sort of the hardest of the hardcore. And something when you're trying to tune, and not that I do the tuning, but when you're trying to tune a game like Madden to bring in a new audience and to appease the existing audience, that if you listen to the community, they're the hardest of the hardcore. They want all the hot routes and everything else that you can do in the game. So there's this big balance, and inevitably, what you do to bring in somebody is going to piss off this group, and
Sure.
if you do something for that group, you piss off this group. So it's always been this interesting, relationship. But for me, it's always just been about data, right? It's just about like, hey, people are playing. Why are they playing? What are they playing? Can we give them more? So, kind of going through that, and then going to Warner Brothers, where you've got these IPs and these just big fan bases. And one of the opportunities at Warner Brothers was because of the arrangement with Fandango for movie ticketing and, streaming. And you could actually start to get a 360 view of a fan. Like, as a DC fan, here's how many movies I see. Here are the comics I'm buying. Here's what I'm watching. Here's what I'm playing. And could we use that information to sort of reinforce that fandom or give you more? And so it's just this fascinating, piece of, and I think actually Niantic too has done a really, really fantastic job with community. And so we had a chance to meet John and the team, and when they were doing Ingress and they were doing these meetups, and it was like, wow, this is super cool, right? They flew a woman to like Alaska on some water landing plane to take a point to win this faction. And that was all community driven. They did a GoFundMe. So we've seen the power of community time and time again. What I don't think we've seen is sort of how community and community features and how games can support community. And, and it's sort of like a look at, esports maybe as an example. When Sean and I were working with the Daybreak team in H1Z1, the battle royale mode was very, very popular, and we were at TwitchCon and they're casting it. But one of the things that the game doesn't do is, if you're on the stream, we don't tell the player you're on the stream. Like, give you a little light that says you're on the stream, and they can ham it up, and they can do some stuff, or give the casters some stats, like what's going on with this guy, what's going on in this game. And that's all stuff that if you collaborate and create that collaboration, it's really, really, it's not easy, but it's not hard to build those features that can make a much, much better product. And so when we think about community, I think that the reason we brought you on was really looking for that way to create games that can actually increase and not just the traditional guilds and chat and stuff, but how can we create features that could actually drive community efforts and action and engage our players more.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that answer. We're already kind of hitting the time, and I feel like, man, I could just keep firing off questions. I got to ask one thing though, right? Going back to building this team and the aspirations of Fortis, I would imagine that there's a lot of people out there, Steve, that are kind of like me, but in the game space, where they're, maybe working for a company. They're really proud of like the things that they've done, but they also recognize that, this might be able to be a little bit better, right? There might be some things that I'm not super keen on, but God, I just, like you, love the game space, want to continue to be there. If there's someone out there that would thrive in a environment like Fortis, what is your sales pitch to them, right? In terms of, why they should consider maybe looking at, hey, a company that wants to do things different, that is committed to that has the support to be able to do that. What do you say to them that might be out there on the fence, kind of thinking about what their next opportunity in the game space might be?
Oh man, you put the introvert and you give them the sales pitch. The sales pitch is like, this is like your area.
All
I
right,
think
then
what
you
I
don't
tell people,
don't call it a sales pitch. Just like, we're having a drink at the bar, or whatever. Someone walks up, they're like, "Hey, I see you playing Clash of Clans, Steve. I love Clash." And it's just big. It's just a natural conversation,
yeah.
right? What do you say to that?
Um, I think what I say is, we're really, really focused on creating amazing games. I think that's where it kind of all starts. And we don't want to be a fast follow company. We really want to look for innovation. We want to find new systems and new ways for players to engage, really innovate in the free to play space, the live services space. And that's kind of at the core. Like, really, my focus has always been about how do we just create better games. And to do that, you need to like plan better, you need to have better processes, better tools, and you have to have a better team. And so when it comes back to the team, we're going to be very focused on building the best team in games, and we want to have the most fun doing it. And it's hard work, it's a lot of work, but at the same time, I tell people winning is way cooler than losing. And when we're winning, we can have fun, and goof around, and we're not saving lives, but we're really entertaining the world. It's been cool just meeting people, and they tell you their first game that they played was Madden. And to me, it's like that Star Wars moment when I saw Star Wars in the theater in the 70s.
Yeah.
It's like that stuck with me, for a long time. Or, you open that gift at the holidays and it's like, wow, this just changes your life. So I think we have that opportunity each and every day to create these experiences that deliver on that promise to the consumer.
Awesome. All right. Well, I could keep you longer, but I also have to be respectful of your time too. So, any like final thoughts? Any story you want to leave us with? Anything at all? Yeah, anything like any
Oh man,
word,
what's
Steve wisdom you want to drop?
this would be a good story. Any suggestions from the audience? Anything out there? Um, I think uh, I don't know. What kind of story? Give me some vectors.
I mean, it could be anything. I don't know. Like I said, I feel like there's a million questions I'd love to ask. How about this one? So, um, you know, I want to go back to a comment that you made about sometimes that, if you love what you're doing, if you have that passion, right, you don't work a day in your life. And as much as I really believe and buy into that philosophy, I also know that sometimes you can get like real sick of dealing with some of the same things, and it feeling kind of repetitive. And you often find yourself going, gosh, like I love this industry so much, but also like, oh, I'm kind of getting burnt out or whatever. Was there ever a point in your career where you kind of, you didn't necessarily like where things were going, and maybe even felt jaded about the industry? And I think my follow up to that is, you talked about starting a company at different points in your life, but you did it now at Fortis, right? So is now that right time? So maybe a story about feeling jaded about the industry and how that might have affected like why you said, now I want to build Fortis.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably one of the toughest points was the EA spouse kind of I guess moment, and I think it was around 2004, 2003, 2004,
Mm-hmm.
sometime in that time frame. One of the testers in a EA studio, his girlfriend at the time wrote this really really thoughtful letter about how he was working 60, 80 hours. Started to really sort of talk about crunch. But it was kind of like it was in the era of Fat Babies, which is one of the probably the funniest game sites, rumor sites around. I remember being up for days, kind of just reading sort of all of the message boards and seeing what people were saying, and because you're trying to figure out like how bad is this problem, and we've got a problem here, and we got to deal with it. So it was a big time of introspection. It was sort of a kick in the gut about because we were really doing it for passion. Like we really wanted to make great games, and we really just kind of wanted to make sure our games were bug free. in those days you couldn't patch, right? And so you
Sure.
get your disc, and I can't help you. Like I can't, like if we ship in a bug, it's just that way. And there's some famous bugs in game history. So I think really that sort of moment in time, we had to come up with better ways of thinking and organizing our work and planning. That was a big piece. But as I think about the Fortis piece, we talked about global and remote, and that I don't think Fortis could exist without remote first and global. When I was at EA, we were 2,500 miles away from headquarters, and EA never wanted a studio in Orlando. Like there was just
Right.
never ever on the strategic priorities
Sure.
was buy a studio in Orlando. But they bought us because we were at the time we were pretty cheap and we did good work. And over time, I think we became probably one of the best studios in the EA, studio ecosystem, certainly in terms of profitability and just sort of the quality of the games we put out year to year. But um, but it was really but we were always second class citizens, right? Headquarters is in California, and so one of the things we wanted to create with Fortis was this idea that remote gives us a level playing field. And we have leaders in Londrina and Brazil and Bucharest and Lisbon, and we treat them just like a person in North America or maybe at the time in headquarters. We're on a call together. They hear things at the same time. We're trying to create the same culture globally, the same set of values, the same principles, the same workflow. And this like idea of remote really like evens the playing field, and gives people a bunch of opportunities where they may not have had opportunities, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, you moved to California for games. I moved to California for
Yep.
games, right? I mean, it was just that's how it worked, and that's where the companies were. And so this idea that we can create really interesting global opportunities for people, no matter where they are in the world, is really interesting, and exciting. It opens up a new source of talent and innovation and creativity.
Yeah. And we are at a point in which the technology can kind of support this. Like I could imagine even back in the sort of Tiburon EA headquarters being right there. There's electronic communication, but gosh, you had to dish out a lot for a good video conference system, and so we really have seen advancement of technologies that I think make it much easier. And in fact, I've personally found things that I think are incredibly efficient about remote work over being in an office too. So it's a different journey, I think, for everyone. But the biggest takeaway for me, Steve, is I completely agree. Like talent doesn't have a city boundary, right? And I love that aspect that there is probably some genius, 17, 18-year-old artist or game developer out there that has that next idea, and to be able to provide a potential opportunity to find those individuals and to give them a chance to really shine. Like I'm not, I was always, it's the same sort of thing even on the creator world where I'm like, you don't need to be in X city to be successful, right? Like that's the beauty of this industry, is that you can be anywhere in the world. You can tell them you're in Los Angeles or New York. Like it doesn't matter. You could be in Iowa City or you could be in Omaha, Nebraska. But the fact of the matter is like we really have to embrace this idea that the best people in games don't exist in this city. Like they're all over the world, and to be able to tap into that is just really exciting. Well, Steve, I like I said, I could keep going. Maybe a part two. It's so interesting as well, like the differences between Sean, who is very outgoing, and thank you, Steve, for letting me actually ask questions instead of just talking the entire. No, I'm just kidding, Sean. Don't fire me. But no, to see kind of the difference that each of you brings to the table, Calvin as well. One of my favorite moments at Fortis so far, and I did mention this a couple streams ago, was like I went out to the Bay Area, was meeting with y'all, we were having some meetings, and there was one particular meeting where it was you, Calvin, and Sean. And I just remember just kind of sitting back and going 15 minutes without saying a word, just because I was so impressed with sort of the wild dynamic that you have, but how well it worked. So anyway, I just want to say thanks for that. It was good. I do aspire to potentially bring both of you on at the same time one of these times.
Ooh.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Sharkey, 1030 says Iowa City, or 1013 says Iowa City too. So you got some hometown heroes around here
That's
as
right.
well. So, Steve, thanks so much. I'm sure this isn't the last time we're going to talk, right? On the question on everyone's mind is, when are we going to see something from Fortis? I think you'd probably echo the fact that there's a lot of teams hard at work doing a lot of great things, still some steps and a big journey in front of us. But very excited to kind of see what comes out of it. So thanks again. And any final thoughts?
Likewise, really appreciate you being on the stream, and you've been an awesome ad. We're really looking forward to continue to explore the community space. Hopefully, you'll see some stuff from us in depending on what part of the world you live in, maybe in 2024. So, we're working hard, and we're looking forward to getting our games out.
Awesome. Steve, thanks so much. Chaucer, a regular here in the field, said, "Thank you, man. Ultra cool and intuitive and empathetic. Would love to have Steve as a boss." So there you go. I agree.
Oh.
Building great teams requires a good leader. Steve's he's a legend. So again, Steve, thank you. Pleasure's been mine. The chat thanks you. Community thanks you. And I look forward to the next time we can do this again. So
awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, man.
everyone.
Have a good one. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye. All righty. Steve, thank you so much. I've kind of said it before, but every time I meet new people that I hadn't met before at Fortis, kind of go through this rediscovery. And believe it or not, there's a lot of people that have a similar story, right? Like spent time within the industry, so much about it that they love and so much about it that they wish they could change, right? For me, that's hyper focused on the community side of things, right? And every time I talk to someone in this space and, we're chatting about community, they're kind of blown away at the fact that community exists as a team underneath the chief operating officer and not like underneath the umbrella of marketing. And, there's other aspects that I think are wildly unique to Fortis. But I think, right, I appreciate the fact that there are leaders that, believe not only in their experience, not only in what they've accomplished and the accolades that they have, but also in, the ability to take risks for the betterment of like the industry and the games that they want to make and potentially the players that play those games. And I know that might sound a little cliche and is that right? Everyone hopes that they are achieving, making players happy and making the next big hit. But I think there's a difference between saying it and then actively doing something to try to achieve it. And as someone who's been adjacent to the industry for a long time, I'm really excited about the potential that exists when you kind of put yourself in that, not only in that headspace, but then you also are given the freedom and the autonomy to be able to do that. So again, Steve, thank you so much. I really hope that you guys push the industry to consider community an important pillar in games again. I mean, you better believe that I'm going to, right? Like that's the hill I'll die on. That is the hill that I joined Fortis to literally die on. And I can confidently say that I've yet to run into major friction or a misalignment of philosophy or how we approach something, which, as you can imagine, I started running into a lot in the last years of Twitch. And there are still people around me that loved community and would have my back. But you know what? You need someone like Steve at the top who's got your back. And that to me is probably the only true path to success. Otherwise, it's just going to be like community management in every other place. And there's a lot of great people in the space on the community side trying to do everything that they can. There's also a lot of people that are held back by right? That lack of flexibility, that lack of freedom, that lack of autonomy, that lack of the ability to connect with other teams within the company. And I really do hope that because Fortis has created an environment where that can happen, that we can make that difference. So, everyone, thanks so much. DK, thank you. Seems like a lot of great people to work with there. I agree. I'm going to keep on bringing them on, right? I learned so much, and I think it also, right, I'm guessing that we've got a few Fortis employees that are tuning in as well. Like, I think it's great to be able to show them another side of Steve that we don't always get to see. I mean, Steve's very humble and he's pretty chill, and whereas like Sean is kind of on the other side, which we love, and they balance each other out perfectly. But maybe yeah, there might be a few. Anyway, thank you all for the hard work that you're putting in, and I'm just as thankful for every other person that's trying to help build their own piece to make this thing happen. So that's gonna be it. The other side. Calvin on win. Win is Calvin might be the hardest sell, right? But I think that if Calvin would give me a chance, we could have a good interview. So Shalvin next. All right. Well, if you are a Fortis employee, happen to be in Slack, let's start pushing for this. I would love to see Sean and Calvin, or Sean and Steve. I think it's really awesome to watch them work together because their brains all work in their own unique way. But as Jing has put it before, and I really like, there's definitely like a really cool yin yang effect that happens. Because the first time that I heard Sean, he's like me. He's kind of loud, and he will definitely deliver his points with passion and in a very sort of formulatic way. And then you see like Steve be in super think mode, and then he like comes back, and then anyway, it's great. So I'd love to be able to showcase that on stream. Anyway, this was now to the point that my wife would classify this as a Midwest goodbye. Like, you're supposed to be wrapping